They called it Dead Mile Ridge on paper maps. But locals didn't use maps. They used warnings. Dead Mile Ridge was a smudge of red earth and fog above a stretch of nameless timberland in Northern California, a place where GPS went cross-eyed and compasses forgot which way was north. To hikers on adrenaline and denial, it was a challenge. To the county, it was a liability. To a handful of old families, it was a memory of hang ropes left on branches because nobody wanted to touch what had done the killing. Alex found the ridge on an amateur cartography forum, a stitched-together topo image with a narrow vein of trail not on any official data set. The thread says it was a logging spur from the 1890s, he told the others, tapping his phone on the hood of David's faded Tacoma. Probably never fully surveyed. We could be the first to record a clean GPX. Lucy was the first to answer, chin-tilted eyes bright with the kind of curiosity that never read the last page before starting the book. Or it was surveyed and they erased it on purpose, she said. In the records, they used to call those places correction sites, where things were corrected off the books. Mark snorted and shouldered his pack. You mean like garbage dumps and drunk tanks? Worse, Lucy said. Punishment grounds. Nina tugged her hair into a low knot, already imagining blisters and sunburn. She was the one who packed the first aid kit long enough to be mistaken for a toolbox. Let's not start with urban legends, she said soft. We'll be out and back by nightfall. David shut the tailgate with a steady palm that could calm any rattling hinge. In and out, he said. Trail discipline. Wind's right, weather's stable. We stick together. No hero steps. The parking lot gravel hissed underneath their boots, a low whisper, like a warning nobody quite heard. They entered the timberline on a smell iron-stained soil and wet cedar. Fog quivered in pockets, never flowing, never breaking, just hanging there as if tied like sails to invisible masts. Somewhere deeper in the green insects chittered out of rhythm a click-click that stuttered and doubled back on itself like a scratched vinyl. Cicadas, Mark said. Not here, Nina answered. Wrong habitat. Then what he asked. The clicking stopped as if embarrassed to be noticed, and the forest exhaled a hush that felt posed like a photograph of silence. Alex filmed. He always filmed phone out, gimbal in hand, catching David's broad shoulders, Lucy's quick steps, Mark's lazy swagger, Nina's careful scans of the ground. He narrated into the mic lower than usual. Day 1, Dead Mile Spur, he said. Team of 5, David, Lucy, Mark, Nina, and me, Alex. Goal record and verify an unlisted trail. Note soil composition, red clay. Old conifer stands, fog enrolls. When he spoke, his own voice came back strange through the mic, thin and tinny the way voices sound inside a metal can. They found their first sign half a mile in a branch, where bark had grown around a groove, a shallow crescent inscribed by friction and time. The bite of a rope, a noose mark. Lucy stepped beneath it, palms open to the cold hum of the shade. My grandmother used to tell a story about a woodlot like this, she said. A week where they cleaned the ledger. No court, no jury, just trees and rope. She hesitated, the fog frosting the sentence. They called the grove a corrector, as if the forest itself corrected the town's sins. David glanced at her, then at the groove. Old damage, he said. Could be logging rigging. Sure, Lucy said, though her mouth made the word a little hollow. They pressed deeper. The unlisted trail braided itself through salal bushes and devil's club like a seam ripper's path. Once, Alex tripped on something half-buried, a crossbeam of blackened wood, hand-planed, no nails, mortise and tenon joinery, too careful to be scrap. He dug with gloves and found a post stump among 3 others, square ordinary. except for the red earth around them, a shade deeper than the rest, like clay that had drunk something it couldn't forget. A breeze came no stronger than a sigh, and the canopy replied with a million little leaf sounds, a faint papery applause that died too fast, the last few claps hanging alone. "You good?" Nina asked Alex, seeing him still crouched over the old joinery. "Yeah," he said, filming the wood. "This was a platform." Lucy looked away. Mark squinted into the trees. "Tell me they didn't need trees." "Don't," Nina said, almost a plea. "Natural causes," David said, dry, and pointed at a root-burned scar from an ancient lightning strike. No proof of anything but time. They stopped for water on a rise, where the fog thinned like old gauze. Alex panned his camera 90 degrees to catch the ridgeline. The frame filled with bleached limbs and red dirt, and the suggestion of a track, that narrow vein running west and up. He took a few stills and checked the GPS. No movement. The feed displayed 3 blue lines where the trail ought to be, past, present, future isochrones overlapping. Their little arrow trembled between them, as if the app were choosing which time to believe in. From the far slope, a woodpecker started up a regular drumming, and then faltered, missed a beat, and hammered faster, frantic like a stuck heartbeat trying to catch itself. "Does it feel colder?" Nina asked. "Sun's behind a deck," David said, but he glanced up. There was no deck, only fog that refused to move. Somewhere, water ticked pling, plink, pling, a drip, with a metronome's discipline. Yet no stream in sight. Lucy uncapped her thermos and poured some tea into the lid, then froze. "This is going to sound stupid," she said, "but I think we should say their names." "Whose names?" Mark said. The wronged Lucy answered, and her voice was not the voice of a girl who half believed. It was the voice of a caretaker once removed from a grave. Or at least, we should say we don't belong to the ledger. "We're not here to judge," Nina finished nodding. David gave a tiny nope shake, the kind men make when they taste a superstition in their mouth without consent. "We'll keep moving," he said. "We're burning daylight." The forest answered with something not quite a groan. Wood on wood, a slow jointing noise like a beam deciding if it would fail. Half an hour later, the trail narrowed to a ribbon along a drop. The soil darkened from brick to garnet. Their boots printed clearly, then seemed to fill themselves, as if the earth wanted to forget their passage, even before they'd finished making it. Alex swung his camera toward a stand of alder. There, caught in the crook of a forked limb, hung a length of rope, noose knot intact, weather blackened but whole. The loop had shrunk to a child's halo. Nobody spoke until Mark broke the quiet with a joke that wasn't a joke. "If this is a film set," he said, 10 out of 10 for props. Lucy took one step toward the tree, then another. She was close enough to touch the knot when she stopped and stared not at the rope, but at the bark. The grooves below the loop were polished, fresh. "Someone's been here," she whispered. A far-off echo answered not a word, not a name, just a stretched vowel of sound, a human mouth's attempt to thicken the air like a can. "Coyotes," David said, because men like David are paid in answers even when they owe none. The echo frayed into a laugh that wasn't a laugh at all, just a broken reed of sound, and then it snapped off mid-breath. They moved on. By late afternoon, the fog grew bodily. It didn't just hang. It leaned, it shouldered, it filled the spaces between ribs. The red soil wet itself without rain and stained their laces. Alex caught a shot of David's boots, the brown leather turning a funeral color, and shivered. Behind them, a long, slow creek began branch against branch, an old house's stair sound made of trees. They turned as one. Nothing. Only the noose, rocking in a breath, the air didn't have a perverse pendulum. Lucy murmured ledger. What ledger? Mark said, whisper too loud. The one the forest keeps, she said, for what the town did here. Nobody remembers what the town did, David said. That's the problem. You don't remember, Lucy said. But somebody's grandmother does. From the ground, something made a wet kiss of a sound, like a boot lifting from mud, except none of them had moved. Nina took a step back and found herself at the very lip of the drop. She steadied, inhaled, and found the air tasted of pennies and old fruit. She blinked hard. Let's camp, David said, pragmatics asserting themselves. We won't make the ridge by nightfall. They found a patch of level ground near a lightning-shattered cedar and set up. The tent nylon snapped with their hands, poles keyed home, guy lines bit into damp soil. Alex filmed the process without narration. He framed the tent against the cedar's black rib cage and let the composition do the talking. As dusk bruised the fog into purple, the forest began a chorus it hadn't practiced properly, insect clock clicks, miscounting the hour bird throats, trying on calls they didn't own a fox's bark that cut itself off as if caught stealing. They ate cold tortillas with peanut butter because they'd promised no fires. Mark made a show of hating it and then ate too. Nina checked blisters. Lucy took notes in the margin of an old pamphlet she'd brought from the county archive, the cover worn enough that the title had rubbed to a ghost. Fun fact, she said, the forest industry called it Dead Mile because the logs had to travel that distance to hit water. But locals used it for something else too officially to whip men who skipped fines, unofficially to hang men who skipped judgment. They said the trees were tall and close-set, efficient. She swallowed. They also said the soil took blood the way flour takes milk. Mark held up his tortilla like a communion wafer. To the efficient. Nina put her hand on the tortilla, lowering it. Don't, she said. From somewhere behind the cedar, a low murmur rolled through the fog, like a crowd hearing a verdict they already knew. David stood, head tilted. He walked the perimeter with a headlamp, the beam cut short by gray. He put a hand to the trunk of a Douglas fir and leaned in the way you do when you want to hear a building complain. The trunk gave back a soft, sonorous thrum wood marrow, resonating like a distant cello string. Wind, Alex asked. Too regular, David said, though he wanted it to be wind. They agreed to keep a 2-on, 2-off watch rotation. Alex volunteered for the last watch, the one that bleeds into dawn and convinces you the world was always gray. David took first. He circled the tent slow, counting silently meter of a man whose mind lives in checklists. At midnight, the forest turned its volume down. And the way you turn a dial with trembling fingers, everything notched lower until even breath sounded like paper being folded. Alex slept. He dreamed of a ledger the size of a road with columns of names written in water that beaded and slid toward the same ditch. He dreamed that someone walked behind him with a pen made of a twig and ink that wasn't ink. He woke to Nina's hand on his shoulder. You're up, she said. You were talking. What did I say? Read the sentence, she said. 4 times. Past her, the darkness made a thin ticking, a thread, caught on a bark, tugged, released, tugged, released. Alex sat up, slid into his jacket, and crawled out the tent's mouth. David sat on a log with his headlamp off, face upturned toward the cedar's broken crown. He didn't turn his head when Alex joined him. You hear it? Alex whispered. David nodded toward the fog, where a single sound threaded itself through the rest, a distant scream dragged out until it lost shape, not quite human, not quite wind, pitched like a wire under strain. Alex put the camera between his knees and pressed record. In the headphone cup, the scream flattened and then doubled a second smaller scream, riding the first like an echo that learned how to live. Lucy emerged, hugging her notebook. Mark stumbled after Bleary, then awake. They stood as a knot of four, listening. From the slope, a rope flex creaked a gallows language, followed by a hush that puffed across their cheeks, the signature of a body moving where no body should. Coyotes, David said again, but the word died on the way out. They stayed like that until the sound guttered and stopped. Silence fell, and it wasn't empty. It was rimmed with a fine ringing, the way your ears ring after a stadium cheer, except there had been no cheer, only a subtraction. Back to sleep, David said finally. Dawn, we move. Nobody slept. Alex lay awake with his eyes on the roof, watching the silhouette of a branch like a crooked finger. He thought of the ledger and the columns and names he didn't know how to pronounce. He thought of his own name. He thought of the 5 of them arranged like tally marks. Sometime near dawn, the insects found a new rhythm, a wound-up toy's buzz that started too fast, slowed to a crawl, then reversed the forest's own tape rewinding. When light bled in, the fog didn't thin. It whitened brighter than any cloud, had a right to be the ground illuminated like a dentist's tray. Alex crawled out first. The world had been rearranged in the smallest way. Their footprints around the tent were gone. New prints circled instead, small and dark, toeless, like someone had walked in leather socks. Lucy joined him. She pointed to the cedar's black skeleton. "Do you see that?" she asked. He followed her finger. There, snug in a crotch of wood above head height, hung another noose. New rope, new knot. The loop was a man's neck, wide perfect. Nina came out. Mark too. David, last eyes already measuring the day's work. No one spoke. You don't speak in churches when you see the thing you prayed not to see. Alex lifted the camera, his hands light, as if he were presenting an offering. Before he could frame the noose, a branch somewhere to their right snapped with a whip crack, a report so clean and close that all of them flinched, hard enough to sway. They turned. Nobody there. Only red earth fog and a trail that wasn't a trail at all, but a seam that had been stitched shut and then picked open again by a patient hand. They ate in silence and packed. David pointed up trail. "We finish this," he said. "We document, then we leave." Lucy's lips thinned, but she nodded. Nina checked the kit fingers fast, then steadier, when she caught herself speeding. Mark made a joke too quiet to hear. They started toward the ridge, toward the part of the day where maps didn't matter anymore. Behind them, the new rope made a noise no rope should make. Without weight, a soft, tightening squeak, oiled and intimate, as if the knot were practicing. They didn't look back. They wouldn't admit they'd already begun to count themselves. The climb to the ridge looked simple on Alex's topo-thin switchbacking lines, an old spur road that once hauled logs toward water. In the world, they were standing in that line, turned into a dull red ribbon, cut into a slope the color of a dried wound. The fog pressed close, beading on eyelashes and map screens alike. David went ahead to kick steps into the tacky clay and test the edges with his trekking pole. He had the kind of movement that reassured you a little, even when nothing else did compact, spare all about center of gravity and intention. "Slow," he said without looking back. "Keep 3 points on the slope and the 4th testing. If you slide fall into the hill, don't fight it." Lucy tucked her notebook away like she was holstering a weapon and fell in behind him. Nina followed the first aid kit, bouncing against her hip like a full canteen. Mark brought up the rear, muttering periodic commentary about the Tacoma's shocks and the inferior character of peanut butter dinners. They gained 10 feet, then 20. The grade steepened. The fog began to hold shapes of its own pouches that sat among the trees like bellies. Alex panned his camera, catching the red river at their feet, and the way the clay rose on their boots and thick collars. The ridge line was invisible, only a suggestion of brightness above them. From somewhere uphill, a thready off-key chorus grew the forest's insects, trying to sing one song and ending up in warring tempos, a buzz that sped, lagged, and scraped as if played through old speakers. Same bad cicadas, Mark said, breath hitching. Not cicadas? Nina said again, softer. I don't know what they are. Underneath the insect-wrong song, something else stitched itself in a slow, dry creak that climbed a trunk like a match being struck in a whisper. David stopped on a shelf and pointed with his chin. There, between two firs whose trunks leaned like old men, a crosspost had been fitted. The beam was newer than the trees, but older than the rope slung across it. The joinery was careful. It had the feeling of a thing built yesterday to mimic a thing from a century ago. Hanging dead center was a noose with a knot so neat it read as handwriting. I'm gonna say what we're all thinking, Mark said. We should go back. Document and leave, David replied. We don't leave half done. Half done isn't a moral failing, Lucy said, looking past him at the loop. But staying might be. Alex zoomed in. The lens found a brand in the beam, a crude stamp of a balance scale. A symbol without a quart. As he filmed, a single drop fell from the knot and hit the beam with a hollow tack, a sound too purposeful for a drip. Nina's jaw worked once, twice. There's no rain, she said, though it wasn't a question. They moved on, hugging the inner edge of the slope. The clay grew slicker with every step, as if the earth were sweating. A shallow gully intersected the trail and carried a thin film of water the color of rust. Someone or something had laid two planks across it, their ends sunk into the mud, their middles springy. David tested the first plank with his pole, then with his weight. One at a time, he said. No sudden moves. Look where you're going, not where you don't want to go. He went. Lucy followed, eyes forward, breath measured. Nina crossed, mouth set like a runner counting strides. Alex went next, the camera hugging his chest. Mark stepped on the second plank and did exactly what David had told him not to. He looked down into the runnel. The water there seemed shallow and harmless, except that the clay beneath it pulsed as if breathing. He stepped to catch his balance, and his heel slipped. He windmilled, grabbed the beam above with both hands, and swore. David shot an arm across palm flat to Mark's chest, holding him against the beam, as if pinning a moth gently enough not to break it. I've got you, he said. You're okay. Eyes up. The plank made a low twanging moan beneath Mark, a sound like a throat trying to clear itself. They got him across. Mark laughed too loudly in the way people do when their throat needs proof things are normal. All right, he said. All right. They gathered in a small recess where the trail widened and the fog thinned just enough to show them a stuttering view of the slope. Below a quilt of red and black, the cedar skeleton sticking up like snapped bones. Lucy took out her notebook again and wrote a line, then another, then stopped the pencil hovering. What Alex asked. Something dumb, she said. I was about to write our names at the top of the page to keep track, but it feels like writing them here would put them somewhere else. I don't want them. Then don't, Nina said. We can count without ink. Downslope, muffled by the coffin-lid fog, a rope whispered against bark in a soft, abrasive shoosh, then stilled when they raised their heads, as if listening back. They resumed the climb. The trail squeezed so tight between two trunks that Alex had to turn sideways to pass. The bark was smooth there, polished by bodies, but not by animals. The polish was at human shoulder height. Above, cut into the living wood, someone had carved letters with a blunt blade, not name sentences. Read what was read. Answer what was answered. Pay what was paid. Lucy reached up with 2 fingers, stopped short of touching, then let her hand fall to her side. They used to post sentences, she said, at the corrector, the way you post a notice to the town, so no one could say they didn't know. A sentence is words, and it's punishment. They made them the same. David looked past the carvings to where the path turned. He had the face of a man watching a storm line decide whether it would cross a river. 15 minutes, he said. Ridge or no ridge, we turn in 15. Deal, Alex said, for all of them. They reached a small bench cut into the hill where the world opened enough to show them the skeletal remains of an old wagon, its iron tires sunk to the hubs in the red. The bed was gone, but the chassis remained cross-braced timbers black with age. On the nearest upright, someone had scratched hatch marks, 4 vertical of 5th slashed across. Sets and sets of 5 tallies running down the grain. Not numbers, Lucy said, voice small. Days, maybe. Or people, Mark said, then made a face at his own word. Kidding, he amended, then didn't smile. Far above, something wooden groaned in a long exhale like a heavy door opened by a patient hand. They stood together and pretended to study the wagon's joinery. None of them said aloud the obvious, that the beam above was perfect gallows height, that the earth below had the caved-in look of a place that had borne repeated weight and then let go. David's watch buzzed. He raised his wrist, glanced, nodded. Turn, he said. We came, we documented. We go. Nobody argued. They pivoted as one toward the downward path, the shelf, the planks, and the beam with its neat loop and stamped scales. Before they took a step, a long, thin scream combed the fog from one end of the slope to the other. Not close, not far, placed everywhere at once, like a radio suddenly turned on to maximum and then dialed down to just above a whisper. They froze. The scream didn't repeat. It left behind a shape in the air where it had been like the place in your chest where you swallow a pill and feel it sitting there, waiting to go. David swallowed, once jaw nodding. We move, he said. And the way he said it made the moving possible. They retraced to the planks. The red runnel looked deeper now, though it couldn't have become so in the time they'd been above. The first plank with the throat seemed to tilt. David stepped onto it and forced it compliant with weight and will. He cross-planted himself, turned, and said, next. Nina went, then Lucy. Alex followed the camera slung. Mark put his boot on the plank, then lifted it. We should cut that rope, he said, nodding toward the loop above the beam. Back there. Put it on the ground. It's a prop, right? So take it off its hook. No cutting, David said. We leave things as found. It's not a thing. Lucy said, not looking at either of them. It's an invitation. Hard pass, Mark muttered. They stepped off the planks and onto the narrow red gutter of the path. The fog around them seemed stirred. Alex felt not wind, but a kind of tide moving across his skin, like air might lean the way a body does when it's deciding to stand. The beam came into view between 2 trunks, its stamp, its loop. The loop had turned slightly. That was to be expected. Rope hangs. Rope turns. The human mind is a clockwork of stories that make scary things reasonable. They walked. The loop turned more, not on a puff of air, on something like a consideration. "Don't look," Nina said, eyes forward. "I'm not." Lucy lied. David kept his line center of gravity over his feet, nothing in him telegraphing a sprint. His pole tapped red clay in that patient concrete assurance step. From the beam, a small sound rose, just the rope throat clearing again, a tight little squeak, the way clean hemp complains as a knot cinches itself. Alex didn't look up. He didn't have to. The squeak put a picture in his head that was too clear. He kept his camera down, recording shin and boot the mechanical comfort of a repeating pattern. They came a beam of the hanging loop. David's face changed the way faces do when the body registers something before the mind does. His chin went up a fraction. His eyes cut left the smallest degree. His hands corrected their angle on the pole, as if adjusting for a sudden change in incline. "David," Nina said. He didn't answer. He had the stubborn look of a man believing his way through a moment he didn't choose. Lucy's hand touched his sleeve. That was when the loop moved decisively. It didn't swing, it descended. No weight pulled it down from above. Rather, the knot rose, then and the loop fell like a mouth opening. David didn't have time to step back. The loop kissed his throat with the dry intimacy of a rope that knows its way around necks. He did the things a trained body does, 2 fingers under the rope to create space chin, tucked to keep the larynx off the lined shoulders down, to distribute pressure. He got air. For a second, he got air. "Knife," Nina said, already fumbling for the one in her kit. Mark lunged, caught the rope above the knot, and bore down, trying to loosen what had tightened. The rope resisted him the way living things resist, by matching his pressure and then adding a little. Alex grabbed David's belt to lift to unweight and felt the pull from above. The beam didn't flex. The rope didn't give. The fog itself seemed to thicken, turning into a body he could push against, but not through. Above them, the beam uttered a long, splintering complaint, a creak that flowered into several harmonics, a chord of wood, as if the gallows were tuning itself. "Stand," David rasped, voice still there. "On my feet." Alex lifted my heels. Alex did palms to soles, raising David by inches. Lucy slid her hand between rope and skin, her knuckles whitening as the loop burned across them. Mark made a sound he'd never made in his life, not a word, a sound that belongs to the part of the brain that hasn't learned to talk. Nina had the knife out. She had a choice: then cut above the knot and risk the blade going toward David, or cut below and give him a little slack. She chose below, slicing clean, fast, controlled. The rope didn't cut. It parted in her hand like a muscle refusing to be severed, flexed away from the blade, then flowed back into itself, a knot tightening to meet the thread. It wasn't alive. It behaved according to a logic older than living. "Again," she said, and cut again and again. Every cut drew from the rope a tiny taut squeal, the sound of fibers singing under steel, stubborn, high, hateful. David's breath hitched. His face went the color of wet clay, not purple, not blue, just erased. He still had his 2 fingers under the loop. He still had that military stubbornness in his posture, making room for lungs with discipline, where the rope tried for closure with habit. "David," Lucy said, voice level a command, wrapped in kindness. "Look at me." He tried. The slit of his focus came to her held, returned to the middle distance, as if the fog had put something there for him to fix on. "Upcut," Mark said, thrashing for leverage. Nina cut up. Not with the blade toward him, she snapped. but she checked her grip and found an angle blade flat against her palm edge, up and away. She shoved under the loop blood from Lucy's knuckles, slicking the rope, and sawed. The rope gave a savage violin string shriek, and then suddenly silence, a plugged hush, like the sound was being swallowed. Alex felt David's weight change on his hands. In that instant, felt it go lighter in a way that didn't mean relief. It meant transfer. The pull from above increased. The rope climbed by increments. Only rope knows how to count. "Anchor him," Alex said, not recognizing his own voice. Mark anchored. Nina cut. Lucy held on like faith holds a name in your mouth when everything else is leaving. The loop did a small, cruel thing, and then it adjusted itself a fraction lower on David's neck and found the place it wanted. David's eyes cleared for a heartbeat. He looked at Lucy. If he said anything with that look, it was "I know." The rope tightened. There was no violent jerk, no cinematic snap, no grotesque sound to mark the end. That was the worst of it. It was gentle like a door easing shut behind a man who's already through it. For a moment, they heard everything. Nina's knife rasping uselessly, Lucy's breath flaring in her nose, Mark's boots scraping red clay. Alex's own pulse hammering in his ears, and then the forest gathered those sounds into itself and dimmed them until the only thing left was a faint, insistent ringing of tinnitus that felt like a verdict. David went soft. His hands opened. The pole slid down the slope and came to a stop against a root. "David," Nina said, as if saying the name might be enough to fetch him back. Alex lowered the weight he held and found there was no weight to lower anymore. There was just the shape of him and the fact of the rope. Lucy didn't cry. Her face did something older than that, an accounting a line carried from column to column. Mark's mouth moved, finding words that weren't there. He said them anyway. "We cut him down," he said. "We cut him down right now." The rope argued, of course. It always does. But they cut. Nina found by inches the place where blade met logic, and logic had to relent. She severed part of the loop. It didn't free him entirely, but it let them bear him, carry him sideways to a little stand where the ground flattened and the fog's hands fell away. They laid him there. Nina worked jaw-set fingers precise, as if procedure could shame the universe for its stupidity. She did compressions she knew were pointless breaths she knew the rope had denied. She did them anyway, because that's what you do until the clock itself tells you to stop. It told her. She stopped. They sat back on their heels, souls clattering inside their bodies like cups in a cupboard after a truck goes by. Alex filmed none of it. The camera had sagged on its strap during the struggle, and now it hung with its little red tally light, still blinking, counting something none of them wanted counted. Lucy stood. She looked at the beam. She looked at the fog. She looked at the red ground and the color of it, and the way it took impressions and then erased them. "Ledger," she said, not softly this time. "All right, we get it. You're keeping one." Mark rounded on her. "Don't talk to it," he said. "Why?" she asked. "It's talking to us." As if on cue, a sound came up from the red runnel, a wet, sibilant murmur. It had no business belonging to water, like words being taught to mud. Nina wiped her hands on a cloth and put the cloth in a bag and sealed the bag because she needed a thing to close. "We have to bring him down," she said, and it wasn't debate, it was duty. They fashioned a drag with David's pack and poles. They moved him carefully. The forest allowed their work with a neutral competence that made it all worse. It did not hinder. It did not help. It recorded. The way back felt like walking inside a lung that was exhaling forever. The fog made them smaller. The red clay made them slow. The beam watched them go with its stamped scales and refused to be ashamed. At the first wider shelf, they stopped not to rest, but to figure the next narrow run. They took the route in micro-decisions, where to put a foot, who to stand below, to catch the slip that couldn't happen. They didn't speak. Every so often the forest inserted a sentence of sound into their silence, a tight squeak, a damp hiss, a plank's low moan, like a teacher correcting a line of reading. Halfway down the fog, parted by a hair's breadth, and gave them a view across a little fold of ravine. Alex saw something there he couldn't hold in his brain and also move, so he looked once and then kept going. On a trunk not far was a smooth patch. On that patch, 5 names had been scratched, not in fresh cut, but in a paler, older scar. David, Lucy, Mark, Nina, Alex. They weren't lined up. They were set like tally marks, 4 crossed by 1. He didn't tell the others. He didn't have to. He knew they'd seen it in their own ways, or would or had, and that the seeing would sit inside them like a small, hot stone and stay there. They made the shelf above the planks. Mark insisted on going first to place his weight where he could fail without taking anyone with him. He crossed. Lucy ventured out. Nina, then Alex, with the drag behind him bearing part of David, while Mark and Nina bore the rest. They came within 3 steps of the far side, when the plank did the most prosaic thing in the world. It cracked right at a knot the way wood does when years and water and strain make a single weak place the exact spot where everything happens. It didn't break fully. It folded just enough to make a hole under Lucy's foot. She sank to her thigh, caught herself on the beam with both hands, and held a hiss going through her teeth that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anger. Alex threw his weight toward her, as did Mark. Nina took the drag rope and made it a safety. They extracted Lucy the way a dentist extracts a reluctant tooth, slow then, all at once. And then there is the strange aftershock of the space where a thing used to be. Lucy made it over. They all made it over. David too, because they wouldn't let the forest pretend he didn't. They reached their old camp at the shattered cedar and laid David down as if putting him to bed. The fog had taken on an evening grade, though the day surely had more to give. Time is elastic in places with ledgers. Nina zipped David's jacket to his throat. She placed his hands together because otherwise they would lie wrong. She sat back and looked at what they had survived and what they had not. "We leave at first light," Mark said, as if that choice could survive the night. "We leave now," Lucy countered. "No fires, no rest. We go." "We can't carry him through the drop in the dark," Nina said. "He'll become a map we can't read. And we'll go with him." She was right. They were anchored here until there was enough light to see the edges of edges. Alex finally lifted the camera. He turned it on himself and spoke, which he had never done, except for cutaways and jokes. "This is Alex," he said the words, feeling like coins falling from a mouth. David's gone. He swallowed. "We're going to bring him out. We're going to get out." As he spoke, a soft, a rhythmic rattle rose from the cedar's black ribs, the sound of dead wood ticking in a wind that had not reached the ground. Lucy sat with her back to the cedar and her knees up and wrote nothing. She opened her notebook to a blank page and stared at it until it felt like staring into a mirror. Mark paced and stopped and paced and stopped, measuring the world in steps he could not complete. He did not look toward the beam above or the noose or the ridge. He looked at the ground because the ground at least had the decency to stay where it was when you told it to. Nina went through the kit again, touched each object like a rosary. She stopped at the knife, wiped it, resheathed it, and placed it where she would know its shape in the dark. Alex played back nothing. He didn't see the beam with the scales stamped in his eyelids when he closed them. He saw a ledger. He saw a neat hand, not human writing letters, that could be a sentence or a sentence. Night came wearing the voices of insects that misremembered their songs. And from far, far off, the fog carried a scream to the edge of hearing, and then placed it down as softly as a sleeping child. The three of them didn't sleep. At some precise middle hour, Lucy stood and performed a deliberate, old-world thing. She faced the dark and said in a voice you used to read at graves, "His name is David Mercer. He was 34. He taught me how to set an anchor and how to tell my body to wait one more second. He paid for things he broke and apologized for things he didn't. He's not yours." The forest responded with a faint, brittle crackle, the kind that lives in dry leaves, though there were no dry leaves here, only wet needles, as if the place were trying out the alphabet of noises until it found the one that matched. Mark stared into the fog and said nothing. Nina's chin trembled once and then stopped doing that because she told it to. Alex pointed his camera at the red ground, at the tents, at the shattered cedar, and then at the beam framed far distant, a geometry against the fog. He did not zoom. He did not narrate. He did not say what the ledger had written that day. He did not have to. In the last hour before dawn, the insects found a new mistake to make in their song, and a rope somewhere made a small, polite cough. And down in the runnel, the water practiced a word it would not learn until later. And from the ridge, a human voice became a line, drawn across the fog, and then erased. They waited for light to make choices carryable. The ledgers of places like this are not bound in paper. They are written in rope, beam red, clay, fog, and sound. On that page, the first line had been set. And the others, their lines were waiting. Morning came, but not the way morning should. The fog didn't rise, it only thinned in streaks, so that shafts of weak light stabbed the forest like spears, but never spread warmth. The air was wet, sour, metallic, as if it had passed through iron pipes before reaching their lungs. The three of them, Lucy, Nina, Mark, stood over David's still body. Alex sat with his camera off, fingers resting on it, as though it were too heavy to lift again. "We can't leave him here," Nina said finally. Her voice was calm, but calm the way a tourniquet is calm, tight enough to hurt, but necessary. Mark wiped his nose with the back of his hand. "We're not leaving anyone. We just can't take him all the way out." He gestured down the slope. "You saw the planks? You saw the ridge. We'll bury him," Lucy said, already moving to unclip her little folding spade from her pack. "Red soil takes blood. It'll take him too." "Better than leaving him to what?" Mark demanded. "To whatever's keeping count." Lucy didn't answer. They dug. The soil was dense and clung to their hands like clay in a potter's wheel. Each spadeful seemed to stick, refusing to let go, as though the ground wanted them to stop. From beneath their shovels came a faint, wet gulping, like someone drinking slowly through a straw that was almost empty. Nina froze. You hear that Mark pretended not to. He pressed harder, throwing clods aside. They laid David down in the shallow grave, his jacket zipped to the chin, his hands folded like someone who might be resting. Lucy placed her notebook on his chest for a moment, whispering a line none of the others could hear. She retrieved the notebook, but when she pulled it back, the cover had a faint smear of red clay across it, like a signature. They filled the earth in. The soil seemed to help pulling itself back into place faster than their spades moved. By the time they'd covered him, the surface was smooth as if it had never been disturbed. No mound, no scar, only a faint darkening of color. Mark staggered back, breathing hard. It's like the forest wanted him. Lucy wiped her muddy hands on her jeans. It did. The ground gave a small, satisfied sigh, the sound of mud settling after a weight has been accepted. They packed in silence. Alex shouldered the camera again, but didn't raise it. Every step felt like it left no mark, the soil erasing them as fast as they made contact. Half a mile down, the fog drew back just enough to show them a clearing, a wide basin of red earth, the trees curving around like ribs. At the center was a pool not wide but deep, its surface trembling though no breeze touched it. The water was black, rimmed with mud, the color of liver. Lucy stopped short. Don't step in that. Mark let out a hollow laugh. Why would I? Because she said this is the second part of the ledger. The pool gave a soft, wet chuckle, mud, bubbling once releasing a bubble that popped with a noise too sharp for mud, like a knuckle cracking underwater. Alex finally lifted the camera. His voice was low. Day 2 ledger pool. Team of 4 minus David. Location unclear. GPS still failing. Observation water moves, though no wind. Nina crouched near the edge, careful not to touch. It's not water. It's soil liquefied. Quick, Clay. You can drown standing up. As if answering, the pool released a long, slow slurp, the sucking sound of a straw at the bottom of a glass, but stretched, patient, hungry. Lucy shivered. They used to talk about the bog taking people. Not punishment, not hanging, just swallowing. They skirted the edge, moving one by one. The mud seemed to lean toward them, the surface dimpling wherever a foot pressed near the rim. Halfway around, Lucy slipped. Her boots skidded on the red clay, and she lurched sideways. Alex reached for her, caught her pack strap, and yanked. For a second, she dangled over the slick lip, staring down at the black. From beneath the mud made a delighted hiss, bubbles breaking in rapid pops like laughter muffled by wet cloth. Mark grabbed Alex's arm, helping haul Lucy back. She landed hard, gasping, mud smeared on her palms. Nina knelt. You okay? Lucy's eyes were wide, pupils blown. It wanted me. Mark barked a laugh. You wanted to fall. That's different. No. Lucy shook her head violently. It reached. Alex turned the camera back to the pool. On the surface, faint hand shapes had pressed up from below, 5-finger splay. Then another, like drowning people pushing against glass. They didn't speak after that. They hurried past, eyes on the trees. The fog grew thicker again, but with it came sound. From every direction rose a chorus of sucking, slurping, gurgling noises. Mud learning to speak. Mud pronouncing syllables badly. Mud rehearsing names. They didn't dare check if the names were theirs. By late afternoon, the trail forked. One branch bent back toward the parking lot. The other angled deeper. Mark insisted they take the outward turn. Lucy argued it didn't matter. The forest would not let them leave until it had its share. Nina broke the tie. Outward. We don't hand ourselves over. They walked. That was when the ground gave way beneath Lucy. One moment she was ahead, the next she was waist deep in slick, clinging clay. Her arms flailed, but the mud sucked at her legs, pulling her down inch by inch. The pit roared with thick, obscene gulps, each one louder than the last, a choir of wet mouths chewing. Grab her, Alex shouted, dropping the camera to lunge forward. He seized her hands slick with mud. Nina and Mark each grabbed her arms. They pulled muscles straining. The mud pulled back. Lucy screamed not just in fear, but in fury. "Don't let it take me." Nina leaned back, heels digging trenches. "Hold, hold." The mud laughed again, a rolling belch of bubbles splattering their faces with red. It sucked at Lucy's legs harder, dragging her down to her chest, then her shoulders. Alex's grip slid. He shouted, "Lucy, kick," she did. For one desperate instant, she rose an inch, then the ground beneath her opened wider like a throat. She went under to the chin, spitting mud from her teeth. "Pull, Mark," roared, veins standing out in his neck. Lucy's eyes locked on Alex's. Tell it I'm not." She never finished. The mud surged, swallowing her whole in one liquid gulp. The pit sealed shut with a deafening slurp, like a cork rammed into a bottle. And then silence fell, broken only by the faint drip of red mud back into itself. Her screams didn't echo. They didn't fade. They simply cut off. Alex collapsed onto his knees, mud coating his arms to the elbow. Mark stumbled back, hands shaking. Nina pressed both palms over her mouth, her breath sobbing against them. Lucy was gone. From the center of the pit, a final bubble rose and burst with a hollow pop like lips smacking in satisfaction. That night, they didn't camp. They huddled under a leaning fir, unable to sleep, unable to think past the image of Lucy's last look. Alex kept the camera in his lap, but never turned it on. Mark sat with his back to the trunk, muttering half sentences. Nina kept whispering I should have tied her over and over. The forest hummed with insect voices, bending into low moans, then rising into sharp whistles, a broken orchestra tuning itself in the dark. Somewhere, a rope creaked, though no tree moved. And from deep in the earth, the faintest gurgle like someone speaking with a mouthful of mud. The ledger had claimed its second line. By the time dawn filtered through the fog again, the three left standing felt less like hikers and more like prisoners who hadn't yet heard their sentence. Their boots were heavy with dried clay, their eyes ringed with sleepless black. The forest wasn't merely watching now, it was escorting them step by step closer to something they didn't want to meet. Alex carried the camera pressed against his chest like a shield. Nina's knife never left her hand. Mark muttered under his breath, sometimes curses, sometimes jokes, without punchlines. They reached a grove, where the trees thinned into a clearing. The fog parted just enough to show a circle of pale soil. At its center stood a figure. Not a man, not quite. It was tall, draped in folds of whiteness like tattered shrouds. No face, no eyes. Just the suggestion of a head bowed slightly forward as if in judgment. The air around it vibrated with a low, rasping breath like wind forced through a broken reed, each exhale warped, each inhale too long. Mark swore and took a step back. Nope, we're done. We turn around. There's no turning, Lucy's voice seemed to whisper, though Lucy was gone. The echo rolled around the clearing, soft and unmistakable. Nina gripped Alex's arm so hard he almost dropped the camera. Don't listen. It's not her. The white figure tilted, slowly, deliberately. From the trees behind them came a tearing sound, fabric ripping, except louder, deeper, like the air itself being split. Mark spun, knife raised. Nothing there. When he turned back, the figure had moved closer without walking, without steps, just nearer, as if the distance between had been erased. Run, Alex whispered, where Nina shot back. The shadow's folds rustled, not like cloth, like bone dust stirred by fingers. Out of it came a sound, high, piercing a scream, stretched so thin it snapped into silence halfway. Mark lost it. He charged forward, swinging the knife, cursing. The blade met air, then cloth, then something that felt like cutting fog. For a second, it seemed nothing happened. Then the whiteness rippled, folded inward, and struck back. It didn't touch him with hands. It tore with absence. A ripping shriek exploded across the clearing, the sound of paper being shredded, of sinew, split of lungs punctured. Mark's body convulsed. His chest opened in 3 slashes, blood spraying the pale soil in arcs. He dropped to his knees, eyes wide, trying to scream, but only coughing wetly. Alex froze. Nina dropped beside Mark, pressing her hands against wounds too wide, too deep. "Stay with me," she cried. The white figure hissed a hollow exhalation like thousands of voices whispering ledger at once. Mark's mouth worked. He managed one phrase, "Don't." Let it before his body jerked and went limp, blood soaking Nina's arms. The shadow folded itself backward, retreating into fog, its scream echoing long after it was gone. Silence fell heavy. Only Alex's camera light blinked, counting seconds like a clock. Nina sat over Mark's body, covered in blood, shaking. "It's 3. 3 now." Alex lowered the camera. His voice cracked. "It won't stop until all 5. Nina finished, eyes shining with both fury and despair. "But we won't give it all 5. Somewhere in the distance, a rope creaked, tautening, and then snapped back with a gunshot crack. A laugh, thin metallic, slid through the trees. They were 2 now, and the forest had already decided. The forest was almost silent now, as though satisfied with 3 lines in its ledger. Only Alex and Nina remained walking through the fog, like survivors of a shipwreck still floating on debris. Their faces were hollowed, their words gone. They didn't speak David's name. They didn't speak Lucy's or Mark's. To say them felt like calling them back, and the forest had already proved it knew how to answer. The trees thinned into a slope that dipped into a gully. The soil was redder than blood, wet and veined with roots that looked disturbingly like ropes. Alex kept the camera running, though his narration had long since stopped. The blinking light was the only proof he still had a will to leave something behind. Nina stopped suddenly, her breath misting. "Do you hear that?" It was faint but clear, a child's laugh. High, broken, echoing across the gully, bouncing between the trees like glass marbles rolling over wood. Alex gritted his teeth. "It's not real. It knows we're listening," Nina whispered. They pressed forward. The trail narrowed again. A pale shape dangled in the fog ahead. For a 6-second, Alex thought it was another noose, but it was worse. It was a body. Lucy's body, or something wearing it. She hung half out of the mud, her face slick with clay, her hair plastered in ropes. Her eyes were open, staring, but her lips were moving. From her throat came a gargling moan, a wet bubbling like mud forced through lungs. The sound rose and fell, forming almost words, breaking, then starting again. Nina clutched Alex's sleeve. "Don't go near her. That's not her." The thing twitched, its fingers clawing at the earth. He helped it, burbled, voice fractured, layered with mud. Alex forced himself to look away. "If we answer, it'll take us too." They hurried past. The sounds followed them for a while, slopping, sucking, coughing cries, then faded into the mist. By dusk, the ridge opened into a clearing. And there it was, the gallows tree. It rose higher than the rest, black bark splitting in ribs, roots snaking wide. From its limbs hung nooses, dozens, maybe hundreds. Some frayed, some new, all swaying gently, though no wind stirred. The air here was alive with sound ropes creaking in unison, fibers tightening and loosening, a chorus of strained sighs. Every creak was different, as if each rope remembered its own victim. Nina shook her head violently. "We can't stop here. We go around." "There is no around," Alex whispered. And then the ropes began to lower. Slowly, deliberately, loops yawning open, descending like hungry mouths. Nina raised her knife, backing up. "No, not me. Not like David." Alex aimed the camera. His voice cracked, but he spoke. "This is Alex. If anyone ever finds this, if anyone ever makes it here, the forest is not just haunted. It's a ledger. It keeps score. It takes balance." The ropes answered with a groan so loud, the ground shook as if the tree itself was laughing. One loop shot forward, wrapping around Nina's wrist. She screamed, slashing wildly. The blade cut rope fibers. This time they gave way, spraying splinters. But more loops fell slithering like snakes. Alex lunged, grabbed her arm, yanked her free. Together they stumbled into the fog, away from the gallows tree. They ran. Branches tore at their clothes, roots grabbed their boots. Behind them, the ropes cracked like whips. Nina tripped. Alex hauled her up again, but in that instant the fog shifted, and the white shadow was there, standing, waiting, its faceless head tilted. It exhaled a sound, like all the air being sucked from a room, leaving behind only ringing silence. "No," Nina whispered. She pushed Alex hard, shoving him sideways into the undergrowth. The shadow moved. It didn't lunge. It simply unfolded itself forward. Its whiteness opened like a sail, swallowing Nina whole. She screamed once, high, sharp, breaking into static. The scream echoed and multiplied, bouncing through the fog until it was impossible to tell where she was or if she was anywhere at all. Then nothing. The forest was quiet again. Alex lay on his back chest, heaving camera still in his hand. He lifted it, pointed it at himself. His face was streaked with mud and tears. "I'm the last," he whispered. 4 lines written, 1 missing. From somewhere deep in the trees came a whispering murmur, thousands of voices speaking at once. "Ledger, ledger, ledger." Alex staggered to his feet, stumbling down the trail. The fog thickened around him, pressing from every side. He didn't know if he was heading toward the parking lot or deeper in. The trees parted once more. He froze. Ahead was the same clearing where they had begun the cedar skeleton, the circle of red soil. But this time, the earth was covered in footprints. Not just theirs. Hundreds. Thousands. Footprints pressed into the clay, leading in, never out. Alex screamed. His voice ripped through the fog, raw, desperate, and the forest caught it, stretching it, echoing it back in 1,000 pitches, until it became a permanent sound in the trees, a scream that would never stop. The camera clattered to the ground. Its red light blinked, then went dark. Some say hikers still hear it, Alex's scream rolling endlessly through the fog. Others claim they've seen 5 figures moving between the trees, one always hanging, one always sinking, one always torn, one bleeding from the eyes, and one screaming but never found. The ledger of the forest is never closed. It only waits.